Good evening. My name is Videriksen, and I want to welcome you. Oh, I have a fan club. How nice. I want to welcome you to the first in this 9-week series of architectural discussions at MOCA. We decided to use the word discussions in lieu of lectures because we're really hoping that the speaker will have a discourse with you, the audience. I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsors without whom this would absolutely not have been possible. And I'm particularly indebted to Chris Tostemann of Bultaub, the German kitchen manufacturer. And also to the Dworsky architectural firm who is responsible for design and production of the poster. Well, quickly, and you certainly don't need to applaud, thank you also to Form Zero, one of the finest architectural bookstores in the country, I think, to Miele, to Morley Builders, to McGuire Partners, to Intaglio Printers who printed the poster, to Joe Addo, Martin Gelber, and Davis Langdon Adamson. And last but not least, thank you to Richard Kershalik, who decided that it was fine for us to have this auditorium for the 9 Mondays when the museum is otherwise dark. Now, just a quick history on how this series came to be. This series is actually the vision of Bernard Zimmerman, a fellow of the American Institute of Architecture, a man whom I personally consider the conscience of the profession. Bernard and I were to share the chairmanship of this series, but due to his illness, I became a committee of one. And as you see, my committee of one goes on outside at the reservations as well. Bernard is on his 2nd month of recuperation from surgery, and I am especially sorry that he's not here tonight. Now, for this evening's speaker, it seemed appropriate to me that this series should be launched with Ray Kappe, an architect who is admired and respected well beyond his profession, and an architect who has involved himself in social responsibility issues for many years, recognizing the need for responsible planning, appropriate urban design, and sensitivity to environmental issues. In the 60s, Kappe chaired the Urban Design Committee of the Los Angeles chapter of the AIA, and he was chairman of the State Environmental Committee for the California Council of the AIA. He also chaired the Housing Committee of the Goals Councils for the City of Los Angeles and was instrumental in establishing a citizens group dedicated to stopping environmental blight. Kappe was part of the effort to help save Watts Towers, and as an advocate, provided the master planning for Watts Community Arts Center. Today, this is a thriving community center where Joe Addo, another young architect with a conscience, is now deeply involved. Kappe's advocacy work included the completion of the Ramona Gardens Park, which is a Hispanic public housing project. This was done in collaboration with Barrio Planners, a group which Kappe helped organize. 3 urban design papers on land development in hillside and mountain areas, as well as transportation and gray areas, was published in association with the L.A. chapter of the AIA. I believe few architects have Kappe's in-depth understanding of what makes L.A. tick, and he may perhaps even have some answers to help us when it doesn't. All the students present tonight know Ray Kappe as the founder and the first director of SCI-Arc, the Southern California Institute of Architecture, where Kappe was director for 15 years. But I bet not many of you know that he was also the first chairman of architecture at Cal Poly Pomona. This is also an architect well known and widely published for his extraordinarily beautiful residential work for well-heeled clients in affluent areas, I might add. A new book just out is available at Form Zero, showing a number of Ray Kappe's residential projects. And by the way, SCI-Arc is putting on a home tour of Ray Kappe's work. There'll be a tour of 10 houses, and these will be over 2 weekends, May 1 and May 8th. So you'll actually have an opportunity to see, I believe it's 10 houses, is it, Shelley? 10 houses. Call SCI-Arc and get the information. This, by the way, is a fundraiser for the school. I have been privileged to know Ray Kappe for more than 30 years, and I have always felt that if America had a history of national treasures, Ray Kappe would surely be on that list. In any case, here's LA's national treasure, Ray Kappe.
Thank you, Anne. I can't live up to that introduction. it's too difficult. I would like to, first of all, say a few things about Bernard. Bernard has always been really kind of the backbone of what goes on in Los Angeles as far as programs. He and I went to Berkeley together, came back down to UCLA, back to Los Angeles, and he immediately started the architecture panel, which was a getting together and talking about Los Angeles and various architectural issues. And then he thought about this 9 and 99. And when he came to me on this, he said, "You want to be part of the 9 and 99?" I said, "What for? Get young people, guys like myself. I've been around a long time. I think we need young ideas. And why don't you have them?" No, he said, so I didn't hear from him again until all of a sudden I saw my name, on a poster. And one other thing, by the way, about Bernard, I owe a lot to him in my career as well. He was the guy who was out at Cal Poly and put my name in the hat to be interviewed for the chair. And I did get the position at that time, and it changed my whole life, and I owe that to Bernard too. So I hope he gets well. We've heard some good news from his son yesterday. I think he's on his way to recovery, and I wish he was here to ask the questions, and as Anne says, always questioning, always fighting windmills, always doing the things that most of us just don't have the guts to do most of the time. So we owe a lot to Bernard, and from there I will begin my talk tonight, which in some ways will go back in time. It deals with some of the issues that Anne already talked about. Some of them I think are still valid. Some of them are still ahead of their time. Some of them are probably ideas that should never have even been put on the table. Anyway, I think we were fortunate in Los Angeles in the early 60s to have a new planning director, Calvin Hamilton. I don't know how many of you here ever knew about Cal or knew him at all, but he was a landscape architect and planner, came to Los Angeles in the early 60s, was very open to young architects and young landscape people and planners. And he opened up the whole city to us. I mean, he brought us in to be part of this whole process at that time. And it was sort of, he had the wonderful naivete that I think is so great, and therefore would sort of let you think about anything, big ideas, however far you wanted to go. And it was always a lot about imagery and what L.A. could really become. And he was not your normal planner. He was really quite a different guy, at least when he first got here. Gradually, as we all know, the political and economic scenes start to take hold, and gradually it's a little harder to keep those dreams where you want them to be. The first time I was called in to a meeting, it was about developing a statement on transportation and communication for the Environmental Goals Committee. Now, this was rather strange. I really didn't, what did I know about communication and transportation? Very little. But I was young enough and probably also naive enough to think, well, I could write this. So I'm going to begin tonight with that first statement because it's interesting to me. Many of the things that were stated at that time are 30 years ago are still not quite here yet, and they're on their way. Some parts are here, some aren't. Anyway, what I wrote at that time was that transportation and communication can be viewed on today's terms in a dual manner. We can accept our existing methods as being a means and an end, or we can project other methods within the framework of our technology. First, I would like to explore our environmental goals if we accept existing criteria. Our goal would be a transit system which is fast, efficient, convenient, well-designed, and comfortable. Stations would be handsome and compatible with the fabric and scale of each community. And the entire system would have to be additive and adaptable to future needs. This system would be supported by existing and additional bus transit. Another alternative would be to use staggered hours, redistribution of living to work relationships, new adjacent cities, or possibly a limitation on the incoming population through low or no growth policies. We could, however, take another look at our potential technology and see what effect this would have upon our future environment. First, it is altogether possible to create a video communication system which could eliminate a large portion of the presently generated automobile trips. Conferences could be held without leaving one's study, and shopping could be carried out from our homes. Only jobs requiring manual labor or services requiring person-to-person contact would necessitate work trips, and it does not take too much imagination to envision a society in which the machine or robots and computer do most, if not all, of the manual labor. Trucking could be eliminated and goods moved through tubes and capsules. All of our purchases made via video communication could be conveyed in the same manner. An electric capsule-type vehicle could certainly be used to transport people, computer-controlled, in a fraction of the size of today's automobile. With reduced transportation trips and a method of transport which recognizes our advanced technology within the framework of a society whose main need for transportation would be recreational, cultural, and social, an altogether different set of goals would have to be established. So that was 30 years ago, and at that time I even was presumptuous enough, and I'll start the slides now. After stating that, I really became kind of enamored with the idea of this small little vehicle and the way of using really the freeway system as a method for dealing with the whole transportation system of Los Angeles. And at that time, the intention was that the freeway system would be at 4-mile intervals if it was to be brought to its conclusion. And my attitude at that was that if we took the intersection points as our centers and developed that would be a good, what I felt, overall plan on this 4-mile grid. Now the 4-mile grid is about comparable to the city of Santa Monica. It would be have a population probably about 100,000 per grid. And so the city would lay out somewhat on this way. These would be the points of intersection in which we'd have our major commercial, you'd have your civic areas, you'd have your dense housing, you'd have your industrial below grade, and you'd have your high schools. And each of these would work to each of the 4 quads. our green belts would be along the freeways. We'd have housing and multiple dwellings closest to the freeways, and each of the 1 mile square areas within that would have a commercial center. It would have schools at the middle with parks, and then normal residential around it. So, as I said, I was presumptuous enough to take this task and decide I would design the whole city. So this was my biggest idea of that time. Then I decided that I really wanted to go further with this, and I made some further studies with the transportation, and I said that these existing freeways should be used as our transportation corridors, and then a study should be financed to develop a one-person vehicle about 1/4 the size of our present automobile, computer-controlled, which could run on our present freeway system. The occupant should be able to board his or her vehicle, push a destination button, and sit back and relax. This vehicle should be ideally as conveniently located to our place of residence as our present-day automobile, and it should provide the same individual, flexible mobility. It should be safe, quiet, smogless, eliminate the hazards of pedestrian and land vehicular intermix, and relieve large portions of land devoted to vehicle movement and storage. Multiple passenger, baggage, and service carrying methods should be devised to be used in conjunction with the individual carrying unit. Conventional automobiles could be picked up at stations on the periphery of our metropolitan area and leased in rent-a-car fashion or privately stored for our use outside of our metropolis. By using proper planning and advanced technology, there is no doubt in our minds that such a vehicle and system could be devised by 1975. And the reason that at that time we were also looking at the four-corridor system as the alternative system, and it was to be ready to go by about 1980, and we felt that we should be doing this other study. Much work has already been done in these areas by our major auto manufacturers. Test tracks now exist onto which a suitably equipped vehicle can be automatically guided and controlled a safe distance behind the one in front. It's interesting that this whole idea, I remember as a young boy going to the World's Fair in '39 in New York, and this idea was already being talked about in 1939. And you'll see further what's happening today, and it's really mind-blowing when 60 years can go by and so little happens. General Motors estimates that the present-day vehicles could cruise at 70 miles per hour or 9,000 vehicles per hour per lane of freeway. And by reducing the size of the vehicle, which is just about a quarter of the size of the regular, this figure could be increased to approximately 30,000 per hour per lane, or 10 times the present capacity of one lane of freeway. This is the same movement capacity set as the goal for the proposed fixed rail system. If this type of capacity could be provided for 4 lanes of freeway, or 3 lanes, we would be increasing our capacity 30 to 40 times the present capacity without building new freeways or rails. Probably 4 or 5 times would suffice for many years. So obviously this type of transportation system has the ability to easily handle the projected capacities for years to come and not be outmoded the day it is installed. It is estimated that the cost of automatic control would be approximately 1/6 the cost of a new freeway and 1/10 the cost of overhead rails. These figures do not take into account land acquisition costs necessary for a rail system, the cost of either carrier or additional costs for the comprehensive transportation system. While studies are being made to develop our transportation vehicle and systems for metropolitan Los Angeles, an interim system using buses could be put into operation within 2 years, and the median strip and the 2 adjacent lanes of the freeway could be used as an exclusive bus corridor upon which bus could travel in a similar way to the proposed rail system, never leaving the freeway during peak hours. And concluded this with saying that we sincerely believe that all the proposals are reasonable and above all feasible. Within an estimated 8 million vehicles on the road in Southern California by 1980, in the estimated 150 per month average expenditure for automobile travel, which today is probably double, we could avail ourselves of $14 billion per year to spend on the described transportation facility. We would think this could build a superb system, providing every benefit the automobile without any of its disadvantages. Okay, the system that that we do have today, that MTA has been working on, was projected to be around, I think, 20 to 28 billion for the whole system. And actually, if we were willing to give up our private use of vehicle, we could probably do this system that I'm talking about very easily. I devised this little vehicle that was this 3-foot by 8-foot vehicle with one seat here that could rotate. There was a desk that slid out. If you wanted to talk to your passenger behind, you'd rotate the seat. This could also drop down for storage, and you could hook these together at this point if you wanted to have your family or extra storage and so forth. So the idea that this would be the little vehicle that would run in the system. I envisioned it at that time even going further. This was the idea that in each of the neighborhoods, these vehicles would run through this depressed area that would be no more than about 5 foot wide, leaving the rest of the street for parks, recreation, and whatever we could develop in there. If there was an alleyway, of course, then the whole area would be open and used. And then our neighborhoods began to look like this. This is where the system would run in the normal street. Everything you see that's green here would be the roadways given back to Greenway. And we'd also be able to no longer need our garages, so they could all become the rooms that many people have turned them into today as well. In a legal fashion. Where we have alleyways, we get the whole street, and that would allow enough space for tennis courts, swimming pools, basketball courts, and whatever, any other recreation facility we may need. Looking at a larger part of the neighborhood, what I've done now is every street has been reduced in half because the vehicle is smaller. In commercial areas, we only need half the parking space, so the other part would go back to green or recreation and could be configured in a variety of ways. Smaller vehicles would allow us to have divider strips and so forth. So this was sort of my vision of the way Los Angeles could be. And in those days, we were always thinking about green belts, turning as much back that way, diminishing the amount of space the car was taking and so forth. Over time now, from the time that I was talking about the smaller vehicle, there are many smaller vehicles, and in France you see this type of vehicle all the time, and it's very practical. It's a nice way to be able to park in Europe because it's always difficult to find parking spaces. Cars are coming out that look like this, which aren't so different from the one I had envisioned earlier. So we are seeing, as we see electric cars come on the market and we see other cars, we're seeing smaller and smaller versions. And I think what's happening is they're kind of setting us up for a time when we're going to talk about smart ways and so forth. And you can't quite read that, but I'll read it to you. These are the robots of the road. This was an article in Time magazine in 1996, November, and it was talking about robots of the road. Automakers are racing to build driverless cars for tomorrow's smartways. So this is, like about 30 years after we had projected ours, so sometimes your ideas, make some sense later on. And what it says there is charting a course, satellite systems and dashboard CD-ROMs track location and plan optimal routes. Look, Ma, no hands. On the Smartway, drivers are free to read the paper as they speed to their destinations. Bumper to bumper. Anti-collision radar lets cars traveling at high speeds stay just a few feet apart. Middle of the road. Coils measure distance from a wire embedded in the road to keep cars in their lane. And now, at this point in time, the Department of Transportation is spending $1 billion a year working on these, what they call smartways. And I think many of you read about it in various articles in the paper and so forth. So it's coming in some form. I mean, by the year 2002, they want to have some of this in happening. In 1998, the chief officer of the Advanced Highway Systems, Caltrans, New Technology and Research Program, Sacramento, constructing new freeways has become so expensive that many people feel it's no longer feasible. A new lane can cost anywhere from $1 million to $100 million, depending on the number of tunnels and bridges and the cost of acquiring local rights and land rights. So we're now looking at automating lanes as much as adding new ones. By installing technology that costs about $10,000 per mile, we can double today's traffic flow to about 4,000 vehicles per hour per lane. That's versus the 9,000 that GM talked about 30 years ago. So we kind of come backwards, I don't know. This is possible via magnetic devices, sensors, and cameras installed in vehicles. They can drive automatically in special lanes or roadways. The technology already exists. We demonstrated the feasibility of such a system in San Diego County last August. This system could reduce congestion by allowing more cars to use the freeways, and it could reduce accidents. More than 90% of all crashes are caused in part by human error. It's now a matter of retrofitting roadways and automobile manufacturers designing cars to take advantage of the new technologies to make our roads safer and more efficient. Okay, the reason I bring all this forward is at the beginning is just to talk about sometimes the ideas that we put out early and what possibilities they have in the future, but it usually takes about 30 years before they really come to pass. So some of the ideas that we're going to talk about for downtown LA are probably going to fall into that same category. At the same time, if we really expect smaller cars, maybe, or if we start to use smartways, maybe, much of what happens in downtown Los Angeles may be different than the way we would envision it on today's terms. Dropping back for a minute and then moving into downtown, this was the result of the Goals Council under Cal Hamilton, the plan we had that was devised for the City of Los Angeles. And the center's concept was the concept that was used. And in this concept, in order to make it work, rail had to connect every one of these dots. Okay, at the time that we were talking about an alternative system, there was really just two legs. There was a leg east and west, and there was a leg north and south. MTA's plan at this point in time was to cover the area of Los Angeles, as you see in that mapping on the right, and that is not too far off of what was necessary, and probably pretty close to what it would take to connect all the dots. What we have today in place is the blue line, the green line, and a portion of the red line. And what has happened in the city of Los Angeles, MTA has gotten such a bad rap over a period of time. They really stopped this whole process in many ways. I mean, they're debating over the Pasadena link. The East L.A. link is on hold. How far out in the valley they go is on hold. And many of the others that are over on this side aren't even thought about yet. So we're left with a sort of a halfway system that relies once again on buses, with the idea that we go back to the 500 more buses that's being talked about in order to make the system larger. This system is very, it would have a very difficult time serving an area like Los Angeles. But that's where we really are at now, and that's the system that we're working on. Unless some of the things that are discussed by Caltrans or by Time Magazine would come into play. Okay, so today we have a system in downtown Los Angeles. That's the red line, as you all know, the subway system here, the blue line coming in and connecting up, and that's the extent of our system. And within the city, you know where the metro stations are and where it starts out at the state here and moves through and then down to MacArthur Park, the blue line coming from Washington and joining up at this point. Okay, in the middle 70s, my firm, and I would like to add my partners to this. I mean, some of the things you saw earlier were really more unilateral, but by 1970, and actually 68, I had 3 other partners, Herb Kahn, Rex Lotery, and Claudio Bocato. And by 76, we were working as a firm, and we were asked to do the people mover system for the City of Los Angeles, be the urban design consultants, that is. We had transportation, bus people, and other people involved, but we were the urban design consultants. The system at that time, as many of you probably are aware of, had some of the characteristics of what MTA has done now. They had really 2 parts of the line. We were asked, we were following really the Wallace McHarg Roberts Todd plan, in which there was an intent to really develop this part of the city. Bunker Hill was in development, and also get into this portion to help make the east end of the town become more viable. So this system, the people mover system, really covered a great deal more of Los Angeles at that time, because it was meant to produce a more viable and stronger city in those areas. We also, following their plan, had what are really automobile intercepts. The parking layout in Los Angeles at that time, this is 1975, looked like so. All the black dots or black portions are on-grade parking, and all the hatched grayer ones that you see here are parking structures. Today, that's probably much greater than that. The feeling with the planners, and one that we followed, was that the automobile was really taking up too much land and not making Los Angeles a better place in which to live. And so the intercept was meant to intercept the car at a location in this point near the convention center in our plan, another one by Union Station. The overall plan by McHarg and Wallace and McHarg, that group, had additional parking where they had their South Park, which we'll talk about later, and they had a few others. But in the first stage, we were dealing with 2 intercepts, which would take the buses, take the cars, and then people would use the automated guideway system. We then demonstrated what it would look like in the city at various locations. And also, another idea, which I don't think is such a good one, but there was a pedway system and a second level system. In those days, there was a great deal of thinking about separating car and pedestrian rather than having them both at the same level. I think since then we realized that it's real important to have people on the streets and not at separating those 2 levels as much. The system was voted down primarily because I think because people in the valley and other parts of the city of Los Angeles didn't feel they wanted to be paying for this. In reality, the city of Los Angeles was only paying 5% of the cost. 80% was being paid by the feds, additional 10% by the state, 5% by the county, and 5% by the city. So the cost of this whole system, I think at that time, with the intercepts, was going to cost L.A. 105 million, and it was, what we've gotten into since then. And some people also were negative about the fact that a system would run above grade and again, take people off the streets at certain points, even though we felt that at the station points, they would be dropping down and it would have worked. This was some of the pedway system, as you probably all know, in Los Angeles that had started in those days, but I don't think we've ever continued any further. That was about as far as it went. But this was also a fairly good example, probably, of what the system would have looked like in the city in certain ways. Okay, then the Wallace-McHarg plan, there's 4 names, I don't want to say them every time. I'll call it the McHarg plan, okay? But they were looking at the city, and many, I guess there must be planners in this group who know some of this stuff, but this was 1972, Los Angeles. This is what Los Angeles looked like in terms of development in 72, with Bunker Hill just starting to rise up, and all of this area not happening, but we did have the convention center. The plan that they made for 1990, 10 years back, would have looked like so. It would have been this whole development. And one of the major aspects of it was South Park, which is a fairly heavy development at this part of the city. And this was sort of the goal, to intensify this portion of the city in relationship to what had already taken place over here. Okay, this drawing shows about the extent of where Los Angeles is today. So we can see from the plan that they had proposed for 1990 came about this far, and not too far off of what was planned has occurred. So the Bunker Hill development has been fairly strong, and many of the high rises, around the library and then down Flower and so forth, have taken place down to about 9th Street or so. But this whole development never took place. Okay, in plan, these were the strong points of that particular plan: the South Park development, the East Side development, the Bunker Hill development. And again, South Park a little closer, which is showing, the residential parts, the office buildings, and so forth. This was planned to have 7,000 residential units. I think it was 7 million square feet of office space, 3 million commercial, and about 4,000 hotel rooms. So it was a fairly large development with, I think, a park. The whole thing covered around 80 acres, and the park was a good portion of it. And the reason that it probably never got off the ground was, first of all, the city either there were problems of probably land acquisition that existed, but in order for, I think, the housing to ever have worked, the park would have had to have been put in place first. And I think what they did is that they first tried to test the housing to see if, the whole thing would work. And the housing didn't move very fast. I think Dan Dworsky's office did the first one. It was a nice set of housing, but people were just not ready to move into that part of Los Angeles. And over time, there's just been a small amount of housing development in that particular area. And part of their plan was, to really look at what were the catalysts and the underutilized areas, and so the Bunker Hill renewal, South Park again. I guess this is the industrial section. This is the market in some of the east side development. Okay, so then this is sort of my evaluation of Los Angeles as we sit here today. And what has taken place, and what can we do about it? Okay, first of all, I've designated several locations, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that I will be discussing. The first one now is, I'll start with South Park. Well, before I do that, actually, most of you are aware of the garment industry area and the flower mart and the produce mart and the very, very heavy used commercial area by the Latino population in this portion. And there's some housing that has begun to develop along with the hospital that exists in this portion, which is sort of a pullover from the south central portion, and both of these are, in a sense. Okay, this is still the old industrial that exists. My feeling, first of all, is that we should really be creating an edge here in order to sort of not deal as much with this as the other parts of the city. This is going to have to, I think, live its own life over here over time. We do have a great change in this particular area now, as we all know. We have Staples is coming into the area, okay, and it's just about built and just about be underway. We've also added to the convention center. So this has a different vitality than it had before. It's an entertainment center, and I say and/or South Park housing. The housing becomes a little more of a question. From my understanding of what Staples is doing, they're adding I think they're going to put in about 1,500 hotel rooms. There's an entertainment center and commercial that's about, let's see, I'm trying to think what it was now. I think it was about 10% of what was originally set up for South Park. So we know that there's a potential to develop along this line and intensify this area. The question is, what happens to what was once to be housing? And it has some housing scattered in it. Staples is picking up quite a bit of the land for parking now, and so how that development takes place is sort of unknown. For housing, I still am not really convinced that who will come to this particular part of LA. Obviously, the Latino population would be a good user in this area if we went into affordable housing and really started to set up plazas rather than maybe the huge park that was shown before. That would be more in character. I mean, that's a possibility. However, I think if developers are going to be beginning to pick this up, it could go in a much different way, and maybe it becomes a very heavy involved entertainment center for Los Angeles at this point. I don't really know. In some ways, in planning, because this is so strong Latino, it seems like that would have a good potential. Another area of which I'll talk about too is this East Side in-town rehab, because we were working on that when we were doing our people mover system back 30 years ago as well. And now there's a certain amount of life beginning along this edge of it with Tom Gilmore, who's coming into the city and trying to develop mixed use in this particular area, and he has a strong conviction about doing that. So this area may begin to move. Also want to have a discussion of where we are right now, and that's Grand Avenue, and what Grand Avenue should really be, also what's happening here in this area. And then my two kind of big ideas are pie in the sky again, which are probably an area over here, which is again what I want to call L.A. the entertainment center of the world, in some connection up to Dodger Stadium, and then another discussion about some housing along the riverfront. Now, in getting into the discussion on some of these other areas, I'm going to go back in time again to show you where we were with those things before. Okay, this was, well, McHarg's plan, once again, for South Park, and this is the way they envisioned it, which was very nice. It had sort of an attitude of a sort of a slightly smaller Central Park. And, you know, one could say, you know, could we envision this with smaller, lower-rise units being used for the Latino population? We know probably this edge will get maybe this heavy in use. What'll happen with this, I still don't know. So, okay, Grand Avenue to me is we really, I think, really missed the boat up here, in my opinion. And I think it's not too late to remedy it. And when we were doing our People Mover study, 7th Street, which was, you know, Broadway and 7th were the two most strongly commercial streets. We have proposed it to be developed this way. Now we've taken the automobile off the street in most of it, Los Angeles. From my new proposal would not do this, but in areas where one does that, of course, we can widen the sidewalks a great deal, and we can do a lot of things out here besides just plant trees too. And when we look at, I don't know why Grand Avenue through here really has vehicular use anyway. I can understand it from the music center going to the freeway and where we need vehicles. Here, it seems to me that buses and tramways could obviously work in Grand Avenue. Okay, we're going to have Gary's piece that's going to be a real tourist attraction and a great, something that's going to be used greatly by the city people, and people will be down for that. We have the museum that we're sitting in here. We have the performance arts next door. We have some empty lots that now are parking and are, I'm sure were proposed to, I think if I remember right, have housing over. My proposal is to really take this street further out, add numerous theaters in this particular area, make it a real performance center, have as many as it can hold outdoor cafes and outdoor areas, so that what we really begin to have is coming through this whole cultural center, a place that's going to be a people place. And I think, you know, there's been enough demonstrations in the city of Los Angeles that show what it takes to make a place work. Santa Monica works because it has many, many theaters. It has many, many restaurants. And once they started to move out on the sidewalks, they became even more popular. Then they get a whole series of people coming in and performing arts. And a place then changes its whole dynamic. And it seems to me Grand Avenue should be that. How does it become a night place? That's what we're trying to do, I think, in many parts of Los Angeles. It has some, you know, daytime where it's fairly viable, but at night it's dead, and it needs housing, it needs hotels, it needs tourist attractions, it needs all these kinds of things, I think, for it to really become at all a viable place. So that's one idea. Okay, going back to our study that we were doing before, when we were looking at this whole mall from the City Hall to Department of Water and Power and to Dorothy Chandler, et cetera, first we felt that there should be a way to come directly off the plaza and down into the lower plaza and so forth. Coming through the tunnels is really not a viable way to move, I don't think. People aren't comfortable with that kind of motion, and plus it's not even a natural way to come from this plaza forward. So if we're going down Grand Avenue this way, we also can make this much stronger. Even when we were doing our study, we were doing it because this was a dead part between the courts buildings, and we said, well, why during the daytime, why isn't there a gathering place for people, and why aren't there things to see and places to eat and so forth. So we were trying to develop this whole linkage at that time from one end to another. Now, with what's going to happen, I would like to see this become a nighttime use in a strong way, and I think that it would still be better if people could, after theater, come directly down here or move down Central Avenue, so there's a little more life going on. We also have the subway now that comes in, a station that's about here, and that allows people to move off in various directions. You want to go here too. And then the plan for this was just, this coming here, making a strong center and moving on down towards City Hall, or really coming through here and crossing by foot, going over to Alvera Street in that area. And at the time when we were doing it, that's the way that it looked there. It was a pretty dead space, and we were trying to enliven it, as I said earlier. Another idea that we had at that time, again, closing the street was having the bus and tram, but this was Broadway, and our image of Broadway was to really, I don't know how many of you have been to Barcelona, but the Ramblas is a very vital part of Barcelona and a very wonderful place to be. And so we were saying, well, we have such a great Latino population, and they really use this street so tremendously. Why don't we just, let them really promenade down the middle of the whole block from, First to 7th Street and so forth. So at that time we were projecting this kind of a use, and I still think it's a good idea. The in-town East Side rehab that we studied at that time, which was part of the program, was again trying to find areas, the buildings that could be rehabilitated, bringing in housing and doing a variety of things that you can see on that side. Today, as I said, Tom Gilmore is trying to begin to work this section right here. And hopefully it'll be successful. I don't know, but if it can be, it would be a nice model of mixed use that we could use in historic buildings and start to move down Spring Street and maybe start to make that a viable street too. Okay, then we go into this area, and this also had its genesis back in our early studies of Los Angeles. At that point in time, we thought it would be a nice idea to take the cornfields and the areas where the train tracks existed, and we thought that the train would no longer be so much in existence as it is at that time, but we thought we'd take that area and try to connect up Civic Center, Little Tokyo, Alvera Street, Chinatown, and then also make a proposal for the L.A. River, and this would be an area where people could kind of walk around, and we would have, well, I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, that was then. Today my feeling about anything of that sort would be that if we came into this area along with Chinatown and Alvera Street, it would seem to me that for LA it would be nice to have all the ethnic groups represented in this area. I've always resented the fact that everybody who came to LA in those years and still always head for Disneyland. I feel that we have enough going for ourselves here that we could do a wonderful entertainment center that would talk about Los Angeles, that would be Los Angeles, that would represent the kinds of things that we do in entertainment and filming and so forth. And today there are always scouts coming around trying to get places for shoots, and it seems like, and people are always, particularly visitors from outside, are interested in seeing shoots being done. It seems like we could do a lot of that. This could have many rides. It could do a variety of things. And then I'll show you how we want to activate the river.
it was interesting. This had been drawn about a week or two ago, and today I read in the paper that Dodger Stadium now wants to rent out Dodger Stadium as a venue for other affairs. My thought was that I always felt it was a big waste that we have so many nights, even during baseball season, excuse me, in days when it's empty, and all during the off season, that something so close to downtown Los Angeles could certainly be accessed from a place below. So this is the way we envisioned first that we'd start slowly in that area years ago, where people would just come around with little trams, walk around. This would be a museum for railroads. The cars would be here and so forth. So it'd be sort of a railroad museum with the idea that it could intensify later. We proposed in those days also to inflatable dam the river, fill it up, make it a place that could be used, particularly in downtown. This was the only idea I think we ever proposed that the city council took seriously. And they went to the Corps of Engineers with it, and it was studied for a while. Corps of Engineers came back and said, you can't do that, it's impossible. Many of us have read, I think just recently, that that's now the proposal for Studio City. They're going to use inflatable dams. Okay, so if they can use inflatable dams in Studio City now, I say let's use inflatable dams downtown again, and make this area, possible to enjoy, and make the river a center of the city again, or a part of the city that people can once again relate to. The cornfields are the area that I'm talking about in general are here. Dodger Stadium's up there. We certainly can, there's tremendous parking up there for one thing. There's all kinds of activities that one could imagine going on in there. We can go up through this method. We could have roller coasters coming down here. I mean, you could think of all kinds of ideas. We have lots of billionaires now. We should be able to do things we couldn't do once upon a time. And then the other side that's so desolate to me is over here. But if we now had a river here, even though this is the way commuters come into town, and this is MTA's yard to clean up their cars at the end of the night and so forth, I don't think we have to live with this totally in this manner and be kept away from the river in this way. We have great bridges that cross the river. It could be quite a wonderful part of Los Angeles. MTA's proposal for the east side extension of the Red Line was this, which actually comes down into this area that I'm proposing for a potential housing in the future. So this is what the yards look like, and I'm just saying, let the trains run, let the trains be cleaned, let there be another parking level, and let the housing begin. And it doesn't have to look like this, but what I would like to propose, and it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but these are examples from the 70s and various other times, and one in Tapiola and one that Dan Dworsky's office did right here. It goes over the tunnel. Nobody said anything about that's an impossibility. So, we can certainly span very easily structurally and acoustically treat an area that makes the thing work, and we could again regain the river and have a place where we could promenade at various levels and enjoy that. And what I would like to propose is that we have a great number of talented architects in this city, and they're doing work all over the world. And that work is attracting attention and will continue to attract more attention. I would think that we could, in Los Angeles, begin to develop, something comparable to IBA that was done in Berlin, or the Wiesenhof that was done, years ago. That would be the kind of places that you'd go along the river, and they would be wonderful examples of housing that tourists could go to see. We'd have restaurants. You could do lots of things that I think could be quite wonderful. And then one other place I want to talk about before I close, and that's Pershing Square again. I mean, how many times have we redone Pershing Square, and this time by an excellent architect, but I think the wrong idea. And that's, first of all, you can't make this work unless you put in, 30 restaurants or something, that you go out and use. This is lunchtime. I shot this at noon. I'm proposing if we don't put in the restaurants, I'd like to propose that we do something that I was really impressed by in Berlin a couple of years ago. Maybe a lot of you have seen it. It's the Red Box in Berlin. I would like to see a big glass box placed in this area that would have a huge model of the city of Los Angeles. And we do it in schools all the time, as you know. We're always doing projects in Los Angeles. The big models are made, they're thrown away. All the great ideas that students have and faculty have are destroyed. I would like to see a huge model of the city right in the middle of Pershing Square, and have a dialogue begin in which people from, we have so many schools here, come down and we can take this apart in section, throw in new ideas, and begin to have a dialogue that would also hopefully engage the city, the departments of the city, and so forth. At the same time, it would always be on view so that people can come and visit and see what is going on. I mean, I thought it was terrific in Berlin, where you could go in and look at Berlin on a model about the size of this platform up here and see everything that was proposed for the city. And it was jammed with people, that were looking, and there was drawings all over the wall. I mean, we keep everything hidden here. I mean, I think some things are, I guess you can find them somewhere in the city, but I would like to see it right out in a public place, and I think it would begin the dialogue and make it much more interesting. So, and finally, this was the image of L.A. 1990. I hope as we finish this series of 9, we can make a new drawing that will talk about L.A. 2010. So let the dialogue begin.
I've noticed a resurgence of city-like and high-rise commercial warehouse type buildings in all the other cities around the country. I've been reading about that, and I think the New York Times did an article about it a few weeks ago. Do you notice? Do you ever hear anyone doing that here?
Well, we have the whole, what you call the artists, I forgot to refer to. Okay, so that community has, there's a lot of that type of thing going on. I think, what I forgot to say before too, when I was talking about housing, unless the housing is very economical, there would be no reason for people probably to move down, or else it had special characteristics. I've heard that the people who are in the film industry, and particularly those that are, it's so vital now, there's so many people acting, that they're looking for spaces all over downtown, and if they can find them, that would offer the kind of opportunities that they want. They usually want big spaces that they can work in, like architects quite often do. We're looking for places like that. SCI-Arc is considering trying to move back into the city, primarily because for lower rental, place we can own, place we can afford. Also, the idea that we can be part of the city and develop, that as well. So, I think that's always going on. I mean, I know in L.A. again, the Rykoff building, which is a huge building over in the industrial area, I remember going through that about 2-3 years ago with somebody who was a developer who wanted to put it, talking about lofts and so forth. But that building's still sitting there. It's a very huge building over by the produce area.
But I think those are always being looked for. We all know that we want to, we wish we could get loft housing or housing above most of our major streets. I mean, developers have been trying to do that for a long time, but we're not getting those people in there. And if we don't get people into those places and we don't add theaters and restaurants, which are always the sure things, we're not going to get the people on the street at night. So I think those are all really important things that we should be establishing. So I don't know. As I said, I think the promenade in Santa Monica is an interesting example. You may like it, may not, but it's a tremendously active place, and it's always active. And I know we did a study for that for Santa Monica when the Department of Transportation wanted us to use again a raised guideway system running through there, and it had nothing to do with those kinds of issues. It had to do with really the real estate or what's there, the kinds of things that are there. And I think Los Angeles has to come to grips with that in some manner. How you do that, I'm not sure. You know, developers have tried, I know. Yes?
How realistic is the possibility of closing Broadway to street traffic? 'Cause that street's always jammed. It's just ripe for.
Well, I think. Pardon? Yeah. Well, my feeling is, you know, that you're saying it's good to close it.
I think it's logical to close it.
Yeah, I do too. So there are I think we should close that. I think we should either close Grand or Grand in combination with Hope, you know, going south. And I think probably either Flower or Fig, probably one of those should. And then I think between that, there's always two other streets that could still carry car traffic. And most of the traffic, the heaviest traffic, is, of course, as you're getting more, I think, westerly in the city, and it eases as you're going easterly. So I think, well, I feel strong about it, but I think also that we should do something with the parking as we do that. I mean, one thing that helps a place, again, I'll use Santa Monica as an example. Santa Monica had, you know, put in place a long time ago parking structures on the periphery of the promenade and the mall. That makes it very easy to get there, very easy to get in, very easy to get, you know, do it. At one time, when that was proposed, they wanted a, you know, automobile. The architect proposed for automobiles to be put back into the mall. It lasted about 1 week, and they closed it back down. You know, they thought it needed that movement in order to have success again. There was that feeling that malls were a deterrent. I think you get but I think you could close some of the streets, get the parking at the periphery, and make it work. But
is anybody talking about that though at the city level?
I don't really know. I'm not. As I said, I'm not in any discussion with the city. Anybody from the city here tonight? No, anybody from the planning department here? Anybody from the CRA here? Well, that's sort of too bad, in a way, because that's the dialogue I think that we would like to have, because they know things we don't know. I'm not naive enough to say that I know the political economic scene, you know, runs what goes on in a city. These architects make proposals that are a little bit pie in the sky, but yet are they? I think that's my point tonight. I think what seems pie in the sky, you know, can become, but it does take a certain amount of energy. And I don't think really our profession has had an awful lot of input into the city in recent times. Bernard has opened it up again. I mean, he's disturbed by the fact that we don't have anything to say, and we're not in the middle of it. The AIA is trying to get back in the swing again, but we don't have enough input, and neither do landscape architects and probably planners. There's so few that get a chance, and it's really all developer driven, but the developers' opportunities are provided by CRA and by people like that. I mean, they make their deals worthwhile for them, or they did. And of course, CRA, as I understand, almost defunct at this point. But so where we'll go, I don't know. And we are, you know, I think we'd like to see it done by private enterprise. And I'm all for that too. But I do think that that needs some push always to make it really happen.
I'm fascinated about your first part of the presentation regarding the automobile and the public transportation system. But it's kind of interesting for me when you describe how the public transportation work or how the freeway system work. You didn't mention about the density of the city, and without enough density, you cannot support all the public transportation system. And I think that's part of the LA's problem is how expensive to build those MTA systems because it stretches too long. It's not enough people to support.
No, that's always was the problem in the first place. That's
the way you describe, reduce the car to half the size. It's very interesting to see the plan you draw. You didn't reduce the size of each property for individual house. You basically reduce the road, but you keep the.
Oh well, no, I'm all for densification. I mean, but if you're using densification with a fixed rail system is very important. Densification with the system I'm showing isn't quite so important because it's really a distributed system and it really works over a whole mat. But if I had been up here, say a year or a year and a half ago, and we were discussing what was going to happen to Los Angeles, and I actually did make these statements in Milano a couple of years ago, I thought the city was going to be really, the densification and so forth would be driven by MTA. So every one of the stations would become, very strong points. All the streets along the rail system would become densified, and they would have to be in order to make the system work. So you have to begin to have more ridership. But now that the system is sort of defunct in a way, I mean, it's been stopped. What do? We've got, La Brea is going to could have some densification. Many of the, I think, what I'd call north-south streets could be densified because and be mixed use. I think the strategic plan put out by L.A. City a couple of years ago referred to all of that, and I agree wholeheartedly with densification in that way. But now if we don't do that, that probably won't happen, right? I mean, where will it densify it? Only at a few stations. One will be in Hollywood, and that's going to be more of a tourist ride, I think, if anything else, that people from downtown can get on the subway and go out to Hollywood. It'll help Hollywood and LA interact, but I don't know what else. I do know, however, that I was given the figure that 40% of the working population in downtown LA come in by the subway system. That sort of amazed me that there's that large population coming in that way. But those are MTA figures. I hope they're correct. And their estimate is that there's going to be 300,000 riders a day coming in once the Hollywood and the Valley part are put in place. And now I think there's 40,000, something like that, riders coming in per day on the subway red line system alone. So, yet if you go down at midday, you certainly wouldn't believe that, But I guess at the rush hours, and I'm never here at rush hours, I imagine it's a little greater, but it's hard to know. I think once started, we should have continued with the MTA system if we're going to do it. But now I really believe the way there's so much, counter attitude against them, that I believe that the system I was talking about will be a way to try to ameliorate the problem by just making some of the lanes work in sort of the smart way to move traffic better on the freeway, because it's going to continue to be, jammed as it is, and maybe more so. The proposal is that 5 million people, I guess over every 10 years will be coming into Los Angeles. So now in Los Angeles area, we're close to 20 million, we'll be at 25 and so forth.
I think that the concept very close to the idea of density is a boundary. The city development need boundary to create the density. All the greatest cities have a very strong physical boundary, like San Francisco or Chicago, and that is the edge of the downtown, and that's contain the people. And the Los Angeles basically have no boundary, even though you mentioned, and I read in the newspaper, somebody projects that in the next couple of decades, Los Angeles will increase another 10 million people. But all those population will go to urban or maybe San Diego, it's just spread out.
No, I know.
You cannot build an MTA system to reach out to the people.
No, I'm not arguing with you on that. I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly on what you're talking about. Los Angeles was built the opposite way, as we all know. Most cities of the world did have boundaries, and then they built new towns on the outside. Los Angeles was really a series of new towns, looking for a center forever, and that's the way it has always been. But it's true. It doesn't have its boundaries. It doesn't have its densification. It doesn't have any of those things. So, and I can't foresee personally that happening to a great degree. I can see it happening in small degrees in various areas. I've given, when I've taught at USC, most of my projects always dealt with densification. And usually they were densification in relationship to, areas in South Central and those areas. But that still isn't what you're talking about totally. It's bringing it maybe closer to the blue line, that kind of thing. But that's about it. The blue line actually probably operates pretty well. It brings in a lot of population every day. And that's why, my first plan I put up on the wall was, the 4 mile square, green boundaries, the centers at certain points. I mean, that's more of an idealized plan, but that won't be.
What do you think about the reactivation of the abandoned red car as an alternative to the subway or the larger?
I don't know. I was never a great fan of the red car like everybody else is. It was always got in the way of the automobile. No, it was a good system in its day, and a rail. And it's a fixed rail system, which is sort of what MTA is doing anyway. Most of the rail is that kind of a thing going out to Pasadena. It's going to be above grade rail. And if you took that whole diagram of what they were going to do, I imagine a lot of that would look for existing rails to use for that process, or introducing new rails for that process. Yes, sir.
Over the past 20-plus years, architects and planning issues have sort of divided away from each other. And some of your own practices sort of indicated that. Are you encouraged that it might be coming back together again and architects might be more involved in the planning issues?
Well, I think many more architects are involved with planning today and urban design issues than, say, in my day. I mean, there was just a handful of us that really cared about the issues of the city. We were a tiny firm, and what were we doing with downtown people mover? Dim Jim almost had a conniption fit when they found out we ended up with that project, because that was their domain, transportation. We weren't transportation experts. We were urbanists in our self-made urbanists really. But I think there's a lot of interest among architects in the city. There's a lot of interest in architects in the planning process. Over the next 8 weeks, I'm sure you're going to find a tremendous amount of exciting proposals coming out of the people who are going to be talking. They're not going to be going back in time like I did. They'll probably be putting out proposals that'll probably be rather mind-blowing. much more probably about intervention than about connectivity, you know, and the kinds of things that I care about. But still, I think, you know, how do you get into that role? And the problem today, I think, is that we're not asked, not too often, some of us, some of you are asked in by this planning department. Probably not very many. In our day, Cal Hamilton invited us in, you know, for studies or for discussions or various things, and gave us things sometimes to do within that process. That was a very open planning department. And CRA also was very open in those years to architects. Then, of course, I think with the diversity program, I think many minorities have had a good play over the years connected to these areas. But many of the other firms, I don't think, had the same opportunity. I'm not, you know, maybe we're into a new era right now. We're into a good economic time. Hopefully it'll remain. You know, the 5 years that we had from 90 to 95 were tough. No development was going on. Once the development starts, architects get involved that way. Maybe we get more involved as advocates. That's where we began. We just advocated things, you know, like saying, well, let's do this great, you know, theme park down here. Not really a theme, but an L.A. park that's gonna, you know, God knows what. Well, how do you get that? You have to go out and sell somebody in the city on the idea that they could even make a good idea, be a good idea. But I think that's something where we get back involved. I don't think the attitude, I think Con Howe is a very nice person. I don't think the planning department, though, is inviting in too many architects to discuss the issues. The plan that they've set down, which is really established, I think, on community planning, is fine. I think it talks about mixed use, some densification. I mean, that's the direction they want to go with most things. I think we've all come to that conclusion that mixed use makes sense. And I don't know where else we go with that other than to bring in projects. And then when architects bring the projects in, I know a lot of young people who've tried to become developers and find, you know, it's so difficult because it takes so long to get anything going. And I think architects are impatient generally. And you know, after a while, after you've gone through one of those, it's pretty hard to take. I wish we could do like, you know, some of the European cities do, which they do so much better over there. When you think what Berlin constantly does, you know, where's our Potsdamer Platz, you know, where somebody, you know, 10 architects come in and design this huge, monstrous thing that's going on. But I mean, you know, they're behind those, or all the kind of planning that goes on there. And you know, I think the same thing in Vienna. You know, Tom Main's over there with a big project now. They're just so much more open, and we've been always really bad publicly in Los Angeles. And I think it would be nice if it finally opened up to some good ideas and let it, you know, let the play begin. You know, let it really happen, and let people throw out ideas. You know, too late.
I'm wondering if the architectural profession, instead of waiting to be invited in, should go knocking on the city planning department's door and bring in the big ideas.
Well, that'll be the conclusion of this series. No, but the AIA right now is doing it more than before, as far as I know. They're this year trying to open it up again. We've done it many times over a period of time, but Michael Lair this year is he's dedicated to getting more into the city play. When Kurt Meyer was with the CRA, it was, you know, he played an important role in what went on. From time to time, architects would get in some of these places. But the difficulty, I think, is if you have to come in with the development team in. If you don't have the guys there with the money and where it's coming from and so forth, everything we bring in is for discussion. And that's why I say let's do it out on the plaza. Let's invite the people in. Let's make it part of the city itself, and then maybe try to get the voters to push for certain things, and then you know. But it's It's a hard thing. It's, you know, I'm talking in kind of a naive way, and you know, when you really know how it works with, you know, all that process, it's not easy. But I don't want to end on a negative. We're going to be going, you know, send up our own images. Anyway, I think the series could be very interesting, and I hope it continues to be good. Thank you.